Hey, it's great to have you here today. My name is Paul Mumaw. I'm the lead pastor for Genesis, and Merry Christmas to all of you. And whether you're new or whether you call Genesis your church, we love having you here with us. We're grateful for the opportunity to be able to worship today. I'm pretty sure that my wife, Jenny, had no idea what she was getting herself into when she married me. Now, I know it might surprise you to find that I'm not perfect. I mean, I know you expect your pastors to be perfect and all, but I can be a little irritable. I'm easily annoyed by things. I'm particular, just to name a few. But how could she know? Like, how could Jenny know? Like, how can you really know someone until you've really spent a couple of years together? There's something else that Jenny had no idea was coming. She had no idea what she was signing up for when she married a pastor. And not that I really knew either. I mean, especially we were so young and getting started in our lives together. And don't get me wrong, we love serving in ministry together. We have served at 3 amazing churches over the last 20 years. We've met lifelong friends. We've watched God do some amazing things in our family and in these churches, and especially in our 12 years here at Genesis. And we wouldn't trade it. This is our church home. This is our church family. We love being a part of it. But little did Jenny realize that full-time vocational ministry meant 48 weeks out of the year we were going to be in church. 48 weeks out of the year we'd be in church on Sunday. Little did she realize that for so many of those years she'd be getting our kids up on her own, Sunday after Sunday, all by herself, not attending just one service, but most of the time 2 services, volunteering most of those weeks as well. Little did she realize that marrying a pastor meant sitting by herself in the auditorium every single week, and the worst part was listening to me over and over again and all of my stories Sunday after Sunday. And thankfully, we're able to laugh about these things now, which I think is a pretty good sign that we're going to be okay, that we're going to make it. But there are other parts of ministry. There's a different kind of hard, some things that you just never really get used to, like going through tragedy or crisis or difficult times with the people that you love. We've done that. Many of you have done that. You've done that here. You've done that at other places. You know it's hard, and you never get used to that. And then there's the pain of watching people leave your church. And when that happens, it stings, as you build relationships, as you build friendships with others. And so that's not easy. And this past year, 2020 has been a doozy, right? I mean, for every single one of us, when it comes to life, and for all of us, we've all had these moments where we wonder, where's God? What's he up to? What's he trying to say through all of this? And I think you know this, and this is not just true of pastors. But following Jesus is hard. I mean, it really is. It's hard. It's harder than we realize. It's not always easy. Frankly, it's complicated at times. I mean, I've learned this. Many of you have learned this, that there is a personal price to pay when it comes to following Jesus. Pastor J.D. Greer says it like this. He says, following Jesus ushers you into this life that is simultaneously the most joyful and the most difficult here on earth. And if you think about many of the things that Jesus said, just pointing out 2 of them, Jesus made at least 2 promises to us. Like in John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. All right, that there are good things when it comes to following Jesus. And so that promise, I mean, we read something like that and I'm like, I'll sign up for that. All right, I mean, that's good. I'm in it for that. But it's also this. It's like in Matthew 16:24, when Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And so we have to recognize that there's the promise of life and life in abundance for those who follow Jesus, but there's also this requirement that we take up our cross every single day and follow Jesus. And I don't know what image comes to your mind when you think of the cross. I mean, here today, we put crosses around our necks, we'll hang crosses from our walls, but 2,000 years ago, the cross was a symbol of torture. It was a symbol of death and oppression. The Romans used the cross to inflict terror on people. And so to say that Jesus offers abundant life to those who follow him, but that it also at the same time means taking up your cross and following Jesus, well, that just seems like an incredible contradiction, if you ask me, doesn't it? I mean, it really does, but But maybe today you might find some encouragement in some crazy sort of way, just hearing me say that following Jesus is hard. It is tough at times. It can be unpredictable, and it requires things like great faith. Following Jesus requires great sacrifice. Following Jesus can be painful at times. It can be difficult. But friends, it's worth it. It is worth following Jesus. It is worth the cost. I want you to know this morning that it is worth the sacrifice, that there is no better way to live your life. There is nothing greater to live your life for than to follow Jesus Christ in this world. And I want you to know this morning that my prayer for you, my prayer for all of us, for our church today, is that even if it's been hard for you, even if it's been a struggle, even if it's been a grind, that God might use this story today, that He might use this time, our worship, maybe the time of communion that we're going to share together in just a while, that He might use this story as a way today of encouraging you and increasing your faith and your trust in Him. And so we're going to look at the Christmas story today. We're going to look at the Christmas story from Joseph's perspective. He shows us how difficult it is really to follow Jesus, but also, get this, also the motivation to be able to do it. And so if you've got a Bible, take it and turn to Matthew chapter 1. It's the first book in the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1. We're in week 2 of this series called Unexpected Christmas. Last week we discovered how Matthew begins his account of the birth of Jesus in an unexpected way as he starts with this long and what feels like pointless genealogy. But as Jerry explained last week, the genealogy is so much more than a bunch of names. Matthew's genealogy helps us see that the story of Jesus is true, that God is working in all things to accomplish His purposes, and that the good news of Jesus Christ is for all people. And so this morning, we're going to pick up where we left off last week, again in Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 18, and we're going to be focusing in on this man by the name of Joseph, that is Jesus' earthly father. Let's read Matthew's words again. Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 18. Here's what Matthew records. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. If you noticed a word there in that first verse, depending on what translation you're reading, here in the ESV, it's the word betrothed or betrothal. And what's that? All right, well, it's the Jewish custom that's also known as kedushin, and it worked this way. A young man and his fiancée would get legally married, but what they had to do in this betrothal was wait a year before they were allowed to live or to sleep together. And so one of the reasons for this particular custom was to make sure that the bride was pure. Now, in those days, marriages were arranged, all right, meaning your parents got to choose, which is one reason I'm glad I didn't live back then, because I'm a little worried who my parents might have picked for me, all right? But when you chose a wife for your son as parents, you'd pay this huge bride price to the family. Now, this part would actually be nice because I've got a daughter that I hope gets married one day, and I have no idea how some of you pay for weddings, all right? And so that actually would be a nice thing. But anyways, the parents paying the price, all right, wanted to make sure that the girl was pure. And so they required a year of waiting, the betrothal, before the bride and groom could live or sleep together, again, to make sure that the girl was not pregnant, by someone else. After a year, the couple could live together and consummate their marriage. Here's what's interesting about the betrothal. Even though you didn't live together, in every other way you were considered married. That means to get out of the arrangements, you had to legally get divorced, all right? You had to get divorced. And so I just set all this up because I want you to see the tension that's going to come into play here, because Mary discovers that she's pregnant. She hasn't been with Joseph. She hasn't been intimate with him yet, or any man for that matter. But because they were betrothed, the only way to get out of it was to get a divorce. Now stop there for a second and imagine how devastating this news must have been for Joseph. And if you've ever been cheated on, I mean, you know how painful something like this could really be. And not only the pain of her unfaithfulness, but this is going to be humiliating for him and for his family too. Now, of course, Joseph didn't believe her at first. Who would? And because he had legal rights, he could divorce Mary and publicly shame her for what had happened. In fact, the law stated that that Joseph could have had Mary stoned to death for what she had done, for violating their betrothal, but he's not going to do that because according to the text, Joseph is making plans to divorce her quietly. Let's pick it up in verse 20. Matthew writes, "But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, 'Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins.' All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. 'Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel,'" which means God with us. "And when Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and called his name Jesus." Now, there are so many questions that you can ask about the Christmas story. There are a ton of them. And the more time you spend around it and engage with it, the more the questions arise. But I couldn't help but think about this question this past week. Why this way? Like, why, God, as you are orchestrating all of the events of the universe and your people and your story of redemption, why do it like this? Why so complicated? Like, why you got to be so controversial? I mean, think about it. It's going to raise all sorts of questions, create so much heartache and inconvenience for Mary and Joseph and their family. I mean, this is going to ruin Joseph and Mary's reputation. In fact, when Joseph even agrees to go on with it and marry her, it's like he's confessing that the baby is actually his. So why did God do it this way? Why write the story this way? Well, so many reasons, I'm sure, but here's one. You know, the way these events unfold reveal that following Jesus isn't a walk in the park. That following Jesus is hard, that it can be confusing at times, and it certainly required a lot of Mary. But today I want to examine this story from the perspective of Joseph and what it required for him, because for Joseph, living out his part in God's story, well, it required a number of things. The first is this. It required a lot of faith, a whole bunch of faith for Joseph to play his part. I mean, by taking Mary as his wife, Joseph was choosing to believe the impossible and to accept all of the risks that came with it. Now, the dream helped, right? Of course the dream helped him. Man, what a dream it must have been. I can imagine Joseph waking up that next morning thinking, what just happened? Like, I had pizza too late. You know, I mean, you get older and you eat too late and weird things happen throughout the night. But we don't know all of the details, but what we do know is that Joseph woke up, he put his faith in the words that the angel spoke to him, and he went out and did exactly what the angel commanded of him. And one of the things I admire in ministry is I love things like our outreach partners here at Genesis Church. And I love their stories. I love their mission. I love hearing about the faith behind why they do what they do. I just think of a couple of examples here. I think about people like Esperandu and Deanne Pierre, serving with Nehemiah Vision Ministries in Haiti. We've been serving with them for some time. Many of you have made a trip down to serve in Haiti with us. I'm always encouraged when I spend time with them. They serve in a tough place. They serve under really difficult conditions. They could move somewhere else. They could move to the States if they wanted to, but God's called them. He's called them to Haiti, and so every day, they just keep serving the people of Haiti, living by faith. I think about missionaries that we support here as a church. I think about David and Carrie Hartman and their family serving in Central Asia. They're Purdue grads. They've got big families here in the States. They have the skills to do anything they could want, but God called them to Central Asia, where today they live in a predominantly Muslim culture. And I remember when they first accepted accepted the call to go to Central Asia. It's been probably 8+ years ago. They shared in one of our services here at Genesis, and the question was asked of them, why? Like, why in the world would you leave your family? Why in the world would you take young kids and move so far away to live in an area that has a history of hostility towards Christians? And I'll never forget Carrie's words. Her response was, because Jesus is worth it. He's worth it. He's worth everything to me, and he's worth everything to be able to share him with others. And so they're living by faith. They're choosing to live by faith. And it may not seem like much compared to the Pierres. It may not seem much compared to the Hartmans, but many of you took a step of faith with us last spring when you made your financial commitment to our giving initiative called Greater. And you remember, with Greater, we want to make disciples, we want to reach our cities, and we want to change the world so we can help even more people find their way back to God. And so a little less than a year ago, so many of you made financial commitments, huge sacrifices to our 2-year financial goal. And right at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic too. And the reason you did so is because, like Carrie, you believe that Jesus is worth it, that he is so worth it. And you are choosing to live by faith and sacrifice. See, following Jesus requires a whole bunch of faith, doesn't it? I mean, every single day. If you think about it, it takes faith to send your kids to school. It's taken faith for some of you to keep your kids home and to do schooling with them at home this year. It takes faith to give. It takes faith to forgive someone. It takes faith to share Jesus with a neighbor or with a family members. It takes faith to look at your business and say, you know what, we're going to surrender this business to the Lord in the way that we operate as a company. It takes faith to get the vaccine. I mean, faith is required of us each and every day, and that's what Joseph is facing. He's learning that following Jesus requires faith in this world. But here's something else that it cost Joseph to follow Jesus. Not only his faith, but it also cost him his reputation. And again, the laws in this particular culture could be extremely harsh. Joseph could have had Mary executed for what she did. I mean, who's going to believe her story? All right, I mean, women had little to no rights in this particular culture. And so everyone's going to think that she's been unfaithful to Joseph. And so all the power is in his hands. He's got every right to walk away and start over with someone new. But again, verse 19, it says that, and her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. Thanks, Jerry. You're such a good guy.
I don't know about that. But
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Excuse me. So Joseph here is described as a just man, but wouldn't a just thing be to punish Mary for her unfaithfulness? It's interesting, if you fast forward a number of years, you find Jesus in the middle of a similar situation. A woman is caught in adultery. There's a group of leaders that have gathered around her. They're ready to stone her for what she's done. And here comes Jesus. You know this. And he steps into the center of it, and he steps in front of this woman coming alongside of her. And what does Jesus say? Hey, whoever has not sinned, you can throw the first stone. And the scripture records that they all dropped their stones and they walked away one by one. They all left. One of our pastors, Ben, we were talking about this past week as we prepared for this message. He brought up an interesting point. He said this, like, is there any chance that as Jesus stood there with that woman, that he thought about his own dad, that he thought about Joseph, and Joseph standing up for Mary? And so Joseph, he didn't want to disgrace her or punish her. Instead, he's going to divorce her quietly. But now the angel of the Lord has come to Joseph in a dream. He's confirmed Mary's story and commanded Joseph to go on and take her as his wife. And that's going to require some faith, but it's also going to put Joseph's reputation on the line. I mean, no one's going to believe them. All right, and their reputation is forever going to be tied to an illegitimate child. In the same way, following Jesus, it's going to take a toll on your reputation at times. I fear that as we continue on in life, it's going to become more and more difficult to operate as a follower of Jesus Christ without it not impacting at least your reputation in some way. I mean, people are going to shame you. They're going to shame us at times. They're going to ridicule and mock you. But the good news is this. The good news is that if you've endured any of this in your life, you're not alone. Even Joseph, even the earthly father of Jesus, endured the questions and the gossip. And so you can expect it. You can expect that this is going to come into your life as you follow Jesus. Here's something else that following Jesus required of Joseph. I'd say a whole lot of obedience as well. Obedience. Verse 25, I don't know if you caught this a moment ago, tells us that Joseph didn't know her, that he not yet knew her and until after Jesus was born. And that's important. And in fact, if you dig behind the meaning of this word, it reveals that not only did Joseph wait a year during the betrothal to be with Mary, but he then waited even longer until after Mary gave birth to be intimate with his wife, all right, to be intimate with Mary. And that must have taken an incredible amount of self-control for this young man, more self-control than I had. I tried to talk Jenny into having our reception before the wedding, all right, so that we could say our vows and just get on with the honeymoon, as quickly as possible. But seriously, she's not here today, so I can say that. But seriously, we live in a society today, if you think about this, with virtually no rules, no boundaries, no waiting when it comes to sexual intimacy. And one of the things that we teach here at Genesis, one of the things that I believe that the Word of God teaches is that sexual intercourse is intended for one man and for one woman within the covenant of marriage. And that anything outside of those bounds is sin. And so with that in mind, students, I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to reserve sexual intimacy for your spouse one day. And I realize that that's the unpopular choice today, but I'm telling you that it's worth the wait. For those of you that are single, I know it's hard to wait. You feel like you're missing out, but saving sexual intimacy for your spouse is worth waiting for. And even if you remain single for the rest of your life, obedience to God is more important and it's more rewarding than compromising the plans that He has for you. Some are living together right now or sexually active in a dating relationship. I want you to know that God has a better plan. He's got a better way for you. And sexual intimacy is a wonderful gift, a sacred gift that is intended for husband and wife within the covenant of marriage. You're going to want God to be a part of your marriage one day. And so I would say, why not invite Him to be a part of your dating or your engagement right now? Obedience isn't always easy, but the more we choose obedience, the more we're going to experience God's power and blessings in our lives. Joseph had to say no. He had to delay some of his own needs in order to say yes to following God, and God's going to use him in an incredible way for what's about to happen. And finally, this, following Jesus is going to require some inconvenience. It's going to inconvenience us. This pregnancy was incredibly inconvenient for Joseph and Mary. It messed up relationships. It took a toll on them financially. They're going to have to escape to Egypt in order to save their lives. And once again, that just reminds me that following Jesus isn't always convenient. It isn't, and in every way. I mean, volunteering in Gen Kids isn't convenient. It's just not convenient. Giving, setting aside, getting into the practice of the discipline of giving isn't convenient. Making time for a small group, especially in the busy culture that we live in today, it isn't convenient. Fostering, adopting, it isn't convenient. Loving people through their struggles, again, not convenient. Worshiping together with your church family, whether in person or online every single week, isn't always convenient. Wearing a mask isn't convenient. And it wasn't convenient for Joseph either. I mean, he could have walked away and said, no, thank you, but Joseph was willing to pay a price with his faith, with his reputation, his obedience, and the inconvenience, all for the sake of being able to say that he was following Jesus in this world. And you can't help but wonder this. You can't help but wonder, where did that kind of strength come from? Like, where did Joseph find that motivation to live this way? What made the difference for him? And how do I get a little bit of what he had going on in his life into my life so that I can live that same sort of way too? Well, can I tell you? Can I tell you where Joseph found the strength and the motivation to follow Jesus that way? It's wrapped up into two words: pure joy. I believe it's wrapped up into these two words, pure joy. Let me help you understand what I mean by that. Matthew chapter 1, verse 23 again. Look at the angel's message to Joseph. He said this to him, "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God with us. All right, I want you to notice this word behold here. It's an important word. It comes from the Greek word idu, and it's a powerful word because it's like saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't go any farther, all right? Don't look beyond what's happening here right now and what I'm about to tell you. It's like saying, look at this. Because when you look at this and you consider everything that is happening, then you will find the strength to do exactly what God is asking you to do. And what is it that God is asking you to embrace? Again, it's the message, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. Now, quick background. This is a prophecy, all right, recorded in the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14 to be exact. And it's a message of hope that God initially gave to King Ahaz. He used these words to encourage King Ahaz and to promise him that he would not allow the approaching enemy to conquer the nation. And wouldn't you know it, there was a birth in the family, and God protected the people. He was good at his word, just as he promised to King Ahab. And I skipped over a whole bunch of details that also kind of fit into it. But the point is this. The point was that these words were originally spoken hundreds of years before Joseph and Jesus. And so for 700 years, this prophecy just kind of hung out there. But now Matthew, in verse 22, connects the message given to Joseph to this Old Testament prophecy by basically saying, Joseph, this prophecy was true for King Ahaz, but even more now. In even greater ways. Joseph, there is a child coming into this world. He's going to be born through a virgin, and his name is Emmanuel. And guess what? He is going to deliver Israel and fulfill the promises made to Abraham hundreds of years ago. And in that moment, and in ways we can't fully comprehend, Joseph's eyes were opened to what was really happening. And can you imagine the joy Joseph must have felt in realizing that the God of heaven was sending his long-awaited Savior into the world and through Mary's belly? Can you imagine the joy that Joseph experienced knowing that help was on the way? All right, and that God was choosing you, yes, you, Joseph, to love and to care for this woman and also love and care for the one who would save the people from their sins. Matthew highlights two names given to this child in verse 21 and 22. First, his name will be called Jesus, which means God saves, and then Emmanuel, which means God with us. And these names provide such a great picture of who the baby is and what he came to do. These words remind us that Jesus came to save us. Jesus came to save us. He came to save us from our sins. And why is that important? Because we can't save ourselves. We don't have that ability. Like you and I aren't capable of living an obedient life. Only Jesus can do that. Only he lived the life the way it was intended to be lived and died a death we deserve to die when he gave his life on the cross. And it's by his death and his resurrection that we are saved. And it's by his death and resurrection that we are made whole. And he came to be with us too. His name is Emmanuel, and because he was fully God and fully man, the scriptures remind us that Jesus experienced all the same pain and all of the same struggles that you and I will experience in this world. And that can be encouraging because that just means that no matter what you go through, he gets it, that Jesus understands, that he has all the help that we need. And we know and believe that he is the perfect example of what it means to live. He is the perfect example of what it means to trust God and to live for him in this world. And what kind of God does that? What kind of God sends his son into the world to die for many? What kind of God would ask Mary and Joseph to endure what they endured? It's a God who loves you like crazy. This God of ours, he loves you with a deep, passionate love, a love that we can't fully comprehend. But he loves you and he cares about you. And what Joseph couldn't know was that everything that God was asking of him, Jesus would do in a better, perfect way. I mean, like Joseph, Jesus lived a life of faith. Joseph wasn't perfect, but Jesus was all the way to the cross. And Jesus' reputation, it would be put on the line. The questions would be asked over and over again about him. And no matter the challenges, no matter the pressure, Jesus would always choose obedience. And you could say that Jesus endured plenty of inconveniences too, but each provided him another opportunity to serve and to lay down his life for us on the cross. And how did Jesus do that? And where did Jesus find the motivation to live that way? Look what the writer of Hebrews says about it. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. We lost it here. We'll look at it over there. Who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. It was the joy of knowing that the price he would pay, that it was worth it. It was worth it. And he did it for you, and he did it for me. And Joseph discovered that joy too when he realized who the baby was. Friends, following Jesus is hard, it's challenging, it's confusing. 2020 has shown us that it can be frightening, but I want you to know that it's worth it. That there is nothing else worth giving your life to than to Jesus Christ. And no matter what life looks like for you right now, Christmas is a reminder that Jesus is here, that God sent the baby, and the baby, Jesus Christ, he knows the way through, and he has everything we need. Genesis, I don't know what it is that you're going through right now. Maybe you'd say you're okay. Maybe you'd say you're running on empty. I know this Christmas might not look like last year. It might not look like anything you've ever experienced before, but don't forget this. Christmas reminds us that joy came down, that Jesus came on the scene, that joy is here, and that no matter how bad or difficult it may be, our joy is in Jesus. Our joy and our hope is in him.